Hey, so welcome to another Writer Wednesday, and today I'm here to talk about my 3 favorite obscure fairy tales. So I was originally going to tell you 3 fairy tales that I love that are obscure, but it took me a long time to tell the first one, so I'm just going to tell you one right now and tell you the other 2 over the course of time. My first favorite obscure fairy tale is called Molly Whuppie. You heard me, Molly Whuppie. Now Molly, she kind of is awesome. So anyway, without further ado, let me just go into the story. Once upon a time, a mother and a father suck at planning families, and they end up with too many children. So with their awesome problem-solving skills, they decide to leave 3 of them in the woods. Because nothing says family like leaving 3 of your children in the woods. I'd honestly like to thank my parents for never deciding to leave me in the woods. I'm very pleased that I was not left in the woods to starve to death. The 3 sisters, they wander around the forest until they come to a random house there, and they knock on the door, and a woman answers, but she tells them she can't help them. What a shock. But the reason she can't help them is because her husband's a giant, and he would kill them. So the woman lets the children in her house in the woods, which already is pretty sketchy. I mean, why would you go to a creepy house in the woods? Haven't they learned anything from Hansel and Gretel? Or like Little Red Riding Hood? Hello, Grandmother Eden in a forest cottage. I mean, these stories have to be circulating. So anyway, the woman lets them in her house, and all's fine until, surprise, surprise, her cannibalistic giant husband finds them. And this is one of my favorite parts, because the woman stands up to her husband and says, "Ye won't touch them, man." That's the exact quote. So the giant obeys his wife, and he says, "Okay, you guys can sleep in my house tonight." And he lets them sleep in the same bed as his 3 daughters. Molly Whuppie notices that as he is putting them to bed, he puts 3 gold chains around his daughters' necks and straw ones around her and her sisters' necks. Suspicious? I think yes. So, during the night, while they're all sleeping, the giant comes into the room with all the sleeping girls. He feels around their necks for the gold chains, and he finds the straw chains. And another shocker, he beats to death the children with the straw chains, his own daughters. Now, I just want to time out for a moment. He's a giant, yes, and although they did not describe his wife as a giant, you would think that his children would be above average size. Am I right in my thinking here? I mean, so when he was beating them, also, wouldn't they make sounds and wake up the other girls? I'm just really confused about how the house was not in a total bloody panic. Like, honestly? But anyway, so he beats his daughters to death, and then he goes back to bed? What? So then, in the next morning, Molly Whuppie wakes up her sisters and is like, "We gotta get out." And I don't know how they weren't traumatized, because, I mean, there's, like, dead bodies in their bed, right? Honestly, shouldn't they have felt the bloodstains, like, growing and, like, ew, there's so much I don't get. So anyway, the children run out of that house as quick as something that's very fast. As quick as lightning. And they run to the king's castle because they definitely know where that is when they could only find a cottage in the woods and nothing else. But they could definitely find the castle, I mean. How could they not? And here's my favorite quote. The king says, and I quote,
"Great job."
They just outsmarted giants, and all he can say is "great job." And then the king goes on to say, "But if you defeat the giant a second time and steal the sword that hangs on the back of his bed, I will give my eldest son to your eldest sister for marriage." How does the king know that the giant has a sword that hangs off the back of his bed? I don't know, and they don't give us answers. So Molly does what any good sibling would do. She takes one for the team, and she says, okay. She goes back into the scary woods, goes back to the scary cottage, and she waits for the giant and his wife to fall asleep. Then she sneaks back inside, because she has awesome status. She grabs the sword, And as always, the giant wakes up, and he chases her, and she runs. She runs like the wind. She runs pretty much like a cannibalistic giant is chasing her. Anywho, Molly makes it to the bridge of one hair, which she can cross, but he can't. And I'm assuming that's because she's a regular-sized human and is light, and he's a giant and is probably pretty bulky. And like any fairy tale hero, as she's crossing the bridge, she turns back and she yells, "Twice yet, Carl, I'll come to Spain." And so after her awesome catchphrase, she returns to the king, who is, again, impressed. Why would he not be? But then he makes her another deal, because he realizes she's pretty clever and she can get stuff done. So the king tells her, "Great job. But if you outwit the giant again and steal the purse that is under his pillow, my second son will go to your second eldest sister for marriage." How does he know what is under the giant's pillow? He does not seem like the fellow to go and risk his life in a giant's cottage and check what's under his pillow. He looks like the fellow who's really greedy and sends children to do his dirty work. So then Molly Whuppie does what Molly Whuppie does. She walks back into the forest where her parents left her to die. She finds the cottage where a cannibalistic giant tried to kill her, and she waits until he falls asleep. And then she sneaks into his bedroom, kind of looks under the pillow, pulls out his purse, and he wakes up and she runs, and he chases her, and they go back to the bridge of one hair. Which, who builds a bridge with one hair? Or is it like the rabbit hair? I don't know. But that's where she goes, and once again, she turns back and she says to this giant, "Once yet, Carl, I'll come to Spain." So Molly does Molly, like she do, and she goes in the scary forest, goes into the giant's house again, sneaks up to him while he's sleeping, and she takes the ring from his finger. But as she's doing so this time, he wakes up early because he's realized there's a pattern to this, and he snatches her hand. And he does that whole evil laugh thing, fee fi fo fum, you're dead and really dumb. And then he says, "If you were me and I were you, what would you do to punish me?" Now, I think Molly's gonna color me impressed and come up with something exciting here to finagle her way out of this. Wouldn't you agree? So Molly answers like any child whose parents left her to starve in the woods would answer. "I would put you in a sack with a cat, a dog, needle, a thread, and shears. And then I would find the thickest stick I could find and
beat you to death with it."
Really, Molly? And you came up with that on the fly? I would not have guessed that. That would not be what was the first thing on my head. So the giant takes her advice, and he puts her in the sack with all those things, and then he leaves her unattended to go look for a stick. Idiot. So it's just Molly in a sack with the giant's wife. And I don't know why she hasn't divorced his butt, because he just killed their children. And she didn't do really anything wrong. She lost her children for being a nice person. But anyway, I digress. So it's just Molly in the sack and the giant's wife. And Molly's just sitting there, and she goes,
"Oh, if you could see what I see."
And so the giant's wife is like, "What is it that you see?" So Molly says, "Okay, you want to see what I can see? I'll show you what I can see." She takes the shears, cuts a hole in it, and lets the wife in, and she gets out and sews it shut. You would have thought while she was in the middle of sewing this that the wife would have been like, "This is just a dark sack filled with artifacts." What? But she's not. So, Molly runs away again. So, Molly doesn't run away this time. She hides and waits, because I guess she wants to see this action unfold. The giant comes back, and he starts going ham, beating the heck out of the sack. But he can't hear his wife saying, "Oh my God, I'm your wife, it's me. It's not the girl." Because the cat and the dog in there are whimpering and meowing and making a lot of sounds, so he can't hear her over their sounds, so he kills her. So now Molly decides, hey, it's a key time to run, right? So she runs to the bridge of one hair, as per usual, and she turns back and she says, "Nevermore, Carl, will I come to Spain." And she goes back to the castle, marries the youngest son of the king, becomes a princess, and her and all her sisters that were abandoned in the woods live happily ever after. So yeah, I read that one about a year ago during Senior Week when I was on a road trip to Michigan with my friends, and it really made me laugh. And I thought you would enjoy that, because I enjoyed it. Let's all enjoy it.
But if you outwit the giant a second time and steal the belt that's at his side, and then the king goes on to say, but if you outwit the giant a second time and steal the belt that hangs slip. And then the king goes on to say, twice yet, Carl, I'll come to Spain. Wait, was that it? Yeah, it was. Fuck. Ugh. Nevermore will I come again to Spain. No, wait, sugar.